Welcome back to the Shock Absorber. It is great for you to join us on this journey. My name is Tim, and I have staged a coup. I'm taking over the hosting chair for this week. But it is great to be joined by regular host, now deposed co-host, Joel McMaster.
It does sound like you took over like the reins.
The reins.
This nation state.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I love the jacket. I think I was supposed to comment on clothing. Is
You
that
do always.
Yeah, okay, excellent.
Yes, that's what I do. This is a McLaren jacket, which the first time I saw it online, I was like, I have to have one of those.
Okay.
And then I sent it to my dad and said, this jacket is unreal because it has the Golf, which is it's an oil company.
Right.
Classic sponsorship of motor racing for a very long time, most particularly seen on a Ford GT40 at Le Mans, which is one of my favourite looking cars of all time in this livery. And they did a special one for Monaco a couple of years ago with McLaren. And I sent it to my dad and I said, yeah, this is amazing. It's one of the best jackets I've ever seen. And he bought one for himself and one for me.
Yeah, nice.
So thanks, Dad.
Very cool.
Really cool. What would you like to comment on?
Well,
Brayden?
and another irregular co-host, but it's great to join us back on the podcast. Brayden.
Hello.
Thanks for coming along.
Hello. Thank you.
And join the Hives t-shirt.
Yes.
The standout.
My Hives t-shirt on today.
We went to the concert together.
Yes.
Was that a t-shirt from that concert?
Yes.
Excellent.
I had a lot of fun with Ethan and Joel and my brother.
Well, you didn't tell me and Ethan left you. We were like, we have to go down the front. And we went and involved ourselves in the mosh pit. But more because I don't go to that many gigs.
Yeah.
I'm like, this is one of my favourite bands of all time.
And they were excellent.
They were excellent.
Yeah.
They were. Why are you in that chair, Tim?
Why am I in this chair? That is great. We're going to get to that very soon. But first,
there's a message from our sponsors.
A message from our sponsors. No, we're continuing in our series. We've been doing the theology, strategy, and today practice of our communications strategy. And since you are the communications pastor, Joel, I thought it would be appropriate for us to switch seats. Because a lot of this is going to be you telling us how we do communications, and in terms of the practice, what are you doing, what are you thinking, and what all the different parts of the communications portfolio of responsibilities that you have. Very corporate, yes. That's exactly how we do things.
Here at Sorrowville.
Sorrowville. Long-term, low-key and relational is how we do things. So we've talked, if you can go back in the last couple of episodes and find out about the theology of communications and the God who communicates and how that shapes what we do. We talked about strategy last week, and particularly a lot around digital technologies and AI. But we always start with a cultural artifact. I suggested we talk about, there's a football player called Travis Kelce who's recently gotten engaged, but no one seemed particularly interested in his fiancée. So instead, we thought that we would talk about the musical talent that is on Brayden's mind, particularly at the moment, which is Oasis. And you made the comment just before we started recording that Oasis is saving music.
That's the claim that's happening at the moment.
Right.
You're jumping on board with
that.
Defend that claim. Why is Oasis saving music, Brayden?
I think there is something caught up in the fact that they are doing their first reunion. Well, their first shows in 14 years, something like that, back together. It is also summer in England at the moment. And so I think there is quite, people are getting caught up with the romance of it all, I think.
The nostalgia.
The nostalgia, it being summer, them doing quite large gigs across the UK, and people really reliving their 90s dreams, I think. And also like Liam and Noel are back together. All is good in the world.
Bit of fraught relationship.
Yeah, exactly. But they're back. They're back playing the songs that everyone loves. How can you not be a bit romantic about this?
Well, I have jumped on board with it's your fault, really.
Yeah.
You've been talking about it, and then I'm like, I think I saw clips of the first of the reunion tour. I think was in Cardiff, wasn't it?
Yeah,
that was the first big gig they did. First of all, the screens that are behind them are absolutely dwarfing the size of the people who are playing the music, which I think is something they probably didn't have when they were, big in the 90s.
Mm.
And playing those big stadiums, I mean, that's what you need, right? I mean, you need to be able to. You're so tiny. Like for the people who are at the other end of the stadium, they're little like ants from up there.
They're also not super active on stage.
No, they never have been.
Yeah, they never have been, but which is funny compared to what you see what the crowd is doing.
Yeah.
But I was sorry if I'm interrupting what you were saying, Tim, but I've
been. Remember, I'm the host today.
Well, I've just been. Thank you. I've just been fascinated by. This is the most I've listened to Oasis now because of Brayden, and then I saw the reunion. And I'm like, oh, this is really interesting. And then I've been listening to a lot of their live at Nebworth, which is in 1996. But I'm kind of fascinated in because I've been listening to a lot of that. YouTube served me a video of Ricky Gervais and Frank Skinner doing a podcast with Noel Gallagher, and the stories you hear about how Noel is kind of the guy he runs the band basically, like he does almost everything, but how they tried to recapture what it was like at that time in the UK. And I was just interested to see, like, it's like this new wave of fresh optimism, it seemed. You've got Oasis, the Euro 96 football tournament, which was huge because that was held in the UK at the time, and England made it to the semi-finals. Yeah. So they almost won it. You've got Oasis, like I was saying. There was like that rave culture that kind of came out. I'm just interested in and New Labour, which was Tony Blair at the time as well, which I believe they aligned themselves with Oasis and Britpop, which is the another thing they got. So there was this huge cultural movement, and I'm always fascinated about why did that happen. And I don't know enough about UK culture to understand what happened. We need the rest is history to do a podcast on that.
I'm sure Dominic has some thoughts.
I'm sure he would.
Yeah, he's very good.
Linking those things together.
I mean, like British culture in the 20th century and beyond is kind of his sweet spot. So yeah, I'm sure he's got some good things to say. I've shared before on the podcast, like for me, that post-grunge, post-Nirvana, for me was skate punk. And so, Blink-182 and Green Day and the sort of the frivolity and silliness of that leading into jackass culture and that kind of, silliness. But I was never really into sort of Britpop as a movement. And so I kind of missed that side. But there are those connections between coming out of, like musically, coming out of grunge and sort of the dourness and the sort of the downbeat of, Pearl Jam and Nirvana and those kind of things, breaking up into this sort of optimism and frivolity of, skate punk, probably, the American kind of thing, but new wave British pop kind of thing.
Well, it goes from Alanis Morissette to the Spice Girls. Like
Spice Girls is another thing.
Spice Girls is another kind of more pop.
You're much more of a student of music culture than I am, Brayden.
But
what's your take?
I'm also was born in 1995, so I kind of approach this not as someone who was living through it, but as someone who, I think I will identify myself as kind of the iTunes generation.
Okay.
Like in terms of, I was that first generation that really could access all music
at any time.
And yes, Spotify came later, like right when I was leaving high school. But like iTunes, even though yes, you were still buying music, it meant that all like something that was released in the 60s was just as accessible to me as something that was released last week. And so a lot of the music that I listened to growing up was older music because it was all accessible and we were kind of looking at bands and exploring bands and things. And I think for me, Oasis are kind of that last big cultural phenomenon that kind of broke out that isn't kind of pop music. Like I think pop music is always going to be popular because it's made to be semi-palatable. And so lots of people will enjoy it casually and there'll always be big pop artists that exist. But I think the interesting thing with the grunge movement and then the Britpop movement is it wasn't manufactured. It just kind of it happened. It was all these things coming together that meant that something that isn't necessarily designed to be pop music became so much bigger and had a cultural impact. And the interesting thing about Oasis is that they are they wanted to be rock stars. They wanted to, they embraced.
Unlike the grunge.
Yeah, they embraced those aspects of wanted to be the biggest band in the world. They openly said they wanted to be the biggest band in the world, which is very interesting. And then just did it, which is insane as well.
But I think they, at the same time, there's that timing of that new wave of optimism that swept through the UK at the time. I would suggest that, I don't know if that was experienced as much in Australia, for example, because it might have been the political climate, it might have been certain economic factors. Like I said, they had the Euro 96 tournament, the football. I mean, a country where supposedly football was invented, to have that huge tournament come at the same time, being played all up and down the country, and then England doing well in it too, and there's even the footballs coming home. I don't know if it was written for that. It might have been written for France '98.
No, it was written for the Euros.
Euro 96. Yeah. So, that was like, Euro 96 was like, there was something happening even like in Australia, and I'm in primary school, but then I used to see like a couple of people had Euro 96 hats on and stuff like that. So I don't know what the reason is that happened, but there's obviously these things that happen in culture that create that, and Oasis are a good timing with that, but also they'd have to be talented to do it as well.
Well, a really significant book comes out in 1992 called The End of History and the Last Man. So this is by Francis Fukuyama, and I think his idea was that once the Cold War ended, so the Berlin Wall comes down in 87, I think that's right, 89. 89. Soviet Union collapses in 91.
Yep.
And so Francis Fukuyama writes this book called The End of History and the Last Man, that he writes that humanity has reached not just the passing of a particular period of post-war history, but the end of history. That is, the end point of man's ideological evolution and the universalization of Western liberal democracy as the final form of human government. So his argument is basically, throughout the Cold War, you've got, is it going to be communism or is it going to be capitalism that conquers the world? And so you've got these fights, the global fights of which country is going to go, and America goes into Korea and to Vietnam and other places to sort of fight off the communist regimes in order to establish capitalist regimes. You've got this competing forces, and it feels like it's competing the whole time through. But then with the collapse of the Soviet Union, you have, capitalism won. And so what Fukuyama writes in this sort of, kind of dense sociological work is what you're noticing in that pop culture, which is in the West, we won.
We won.
That's it. It's only up from here. And I was having this conversation with a young girl in our Bible study who wasn't born to the early 2000s, and trying to explain to her this exact same concept of the idea of the frivolity of the 90s. But that it was all heading up, and then 9/11. And so 9/11
was the end,
is the end of this period of optimism, because all of a sudden, as Fukuyama says, this universalization of Western liberal democracy as the final form of human government shows itself to actually be fragile. And so when those planes hit those buildings and they collapse, all of a sudden the West goes, maybe we are not all powerful and impenetrable, and maybe there are actually other historical and ideological forces that are against us. That it's not the end of history. We didn't actually win and conquer all our foes.
Yeah. And it's not just a process of living that out.
That's right. Yeah. So there's actually going to be a continual struggle. And so that, I think, was ideologically a massive turning point in culture. So I was trying to explain this to Emily, and to be able to say, because she's only ever known a post 9/11 world, and maybe that even for you, Brayden, like not really being conscious. I'm kind of like I'm not really conscious of a world before the Berlin Wall falling, even though I was technically alive for 8 years. But it's not in your conscience.
Yeah.
Whereas 9/11 happens and I'm 19.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so
I was in high school. Yep.
Yeah, and so I'm consciously aware of this shift and this change. So we were talking about, we are kind of making our way towards our point of today's podcast.
Yeah.
But was that the link here is, I can't remember which of you said it earlier, that Oasis are sort of, they captured maybe a time that cannot be replicated.
Yeah.
Can that movement happen again?
Can that movement happen again? And how that relates to creating content now. But yeah, did you want to say more about that, Joel, about your thoughts on it? Can it be replicated?
Well, I don't know if it can, because I think we've spoken about this before, like the internet, because it can be so individualistic and consumeristic, it's therefore splinters itself into consuming whatever, we can consume whatever we want. And so you can't have this, I mean, even I was having a discussion in our community group last week of the similar thing of people a bit younger, probably 19 or something like that in that age range, of that they couldn't fully grasp the fact that everyone was watching the same thing on TV.
Yeah.
And you'd turn up to school and you would talk about like, I remember the one that used to happen at my school a lot of the time was, what happened to the footy show?
Oh, yes.
Because but this is in primary school, because then it was cool that you were allowed to stay up late enough to watch the footy show first of all. And then it had a few maybe things that you shouldn't be watching, inappropriate things you shouldn't be watching. So you were cooler by doing that.
Yeah.
But you knew that if you were allowed to stay up late enough, you could watch Channel 9 and you could watch that and then participate in the conversation. Same with things like Home and Away and other shows. That they were unable to fully grasp the concept that you could actually... there was only an opportunity to watch a particular thing, because there were certain gatekeepers about in terms of
there were
TV, radio.
Essentially 3 options.
Right.
Yeah, 7, 9 or 10.
Yep.
And if you were weird, maybe the ABC.
If you were weird.
But it was 7, 9 or 10. Well, that's basically all you had.
Right.
And so, everyone was essentially watching the same thing. I remember an anecdote from a book that I read about 90s culture, and they said that more people in America watched just the average Seinfeld episode than watched the finale of Game of Thrones. And we pick up in the media that the final episode of Game of Thrones is this massive cultural phenomenon, and you feel like you're missing out. And it's actually, no. There, far less people are engaged with this than not. I remember talking to someone, it was actually at church last week, and they said, they're going over to someone's house and they were about to binge White Lotus. And they're like, we feel like we're the only people in the world that have not seen White Lotus, because it's all that everyone's talking about. And I'm like, I barely know what you're talking about.
I haven't watched it either.
Yeah. But it was the same kind of thing. Like, we feel that there are these big cultural moments, but actually our attention is so fractured, and our engagement is so fractured that no, most people are not. Whereas you could probably say most people were watching Seinfeld every week that it came out.
Oh, and that's why it made the people so much money, because so many people were watching it.
Yes.
At Seinfeld.
Yeah.
And it's similar with the Oasis thing. Is like everyone would know about Oasis, because not only are they playing big gigs and doing all that, but then the only time you see it is on TV, and then so you're talking about it. So I think that's where we were trying to go, is that can something like a movement like the Britpop Oasis UK positivity movement, can that happen again? And then how do we respond to that as Christians, especially if we're talking about communications and making the content that we create? I think that's where we were trying to head with it.
That's a great pivot.
Thank you.
It shows that you're good at being a host of the radio podcast. So
regretting your coup, are you?
So pivoting from the conversation about culture and to thinking more about communications.
Yep. Good work. Well done.
Yeah, that was good. Thank you. No, but we are thinking about the practice of communications.
Yep.
And the creation of content in the 2025 and what that actually looks like.
2025.
The 2025.
Special year.
Yes.
Well, it is, because Travis and Taylor are engaged.
Taylor.
Is that her name? Okay.
Right, yeah.
Tay-Tay.
Tay-Tay?
Yeah. That's right. Who, incidentally, it's funny you were talking about it, only went on her first ever podcast recently, which is Travis's podcast with his brother.
Yeah, right.
It's called New Heights, if you want to check that out. That's the first podcast she's ever done.
Yeah.
It's fascinating, I think. She's still, it's kind of almost like a in juxtaposition to what we're talking about, is that she's such a big star, but she's never done a podcast.
Yeah. Sorry.
I wouldn't listen to that.
I thought we agreed not to go there and have this conversation.
No, it's fine.
I mean, she's a phenomenon.
Right.
Yes. And people can go back in the archives, and I'll put the link below, of the conversation you, me and Stu had about Taylor Swift.
Yes.
Number of years ago, a couple of seasons ago.
That was a long time ago.
It was a long time ago.
It's
We were talking about
pre-Eras tour, which I feel like
It would have
has
been,
brought
yes.
things to
Yeah,
another
yeah.
level.
Yeah.
But shaking that off, let's think about. Let's think. So this is your area of responsibility in our church, Joel.
Yes, it is.
The communications. So in terms of practice, so we've thought about theology, we've thought about strategy. Let's hit up the practice. The practice largely started in COVID. And
right.
a large part of what we do in communications comes out of the necessity of we weren't able to meet regularly together, and us thinking, how do we continue to do what the things that we are able to do within the limited and constrained capacity that we have with lockdowns and not being able to meet together and those kind of things. Just take us back to that time, like in terms of, for you and your responsibilities of looking after our communication strategy, the ideas that you had, what was going through your mind as you kind of helped lead us through that particular moment?
Well, yeah, initially, and actually, we're going to release a talk that I did next week about kind of talking about this, so I'll try and be slightly brief about it. But originally it started, and it's cool that Brayden's on here, originally the idea to record the Shockers was something I spoke to Stu about at Brayden's wedding, at their reception, which was kind of funny. Brayden and Beck's wedding, I should say. The first thing I think was that I thought that Stu had so many ideas that were perhaps not as well known, and therefore we should do a podcast. And so the first season of the Shockers was recorded prior to me coming on staff. Then as we came on staff, I wanted to keep doing things like that. We did a second season of how we planted Soul Revival Church. And then you joined us in the third season, and then it kind of went on from there. I'd been a fan of podcasts for a very long time. Basically coincided with me getting on Twitter in about 2009, 2010, and just consuming football podcasts. And that's where I found all my favorite football writers online. And then now I'm like, oh, they're talking about a podcast. And the one that I remember the most was The Guardian, so the newspaper podcast, and they'd first ever done one at the 2006 World Cup. So very, very long time ago, but basically guys at the tournament finishing the day, watching all the days of the game, and then just talking about them. That's what it was. And I have a real desire to find out more things. If I'm interested in something, I want to get more insight. So those things combined is why I love podcasts. And I thought that a lot of the things that Stu has done as a leader and together with a group of leaders, whether it's Soul Revival as a youth and young adult ministry at Gaimea or at Soul Revival Church, needed a wider audience. And that's the thing that the internet provides you, and is that access. People can get access no matter what. Now the flip side is the access is so wide, and it's that splintering that we've talked about, is in contrast is something that you have to think about is that, and it's something I've been working through in terms of our YouTube strategy lately and how we're approaching YouTube. We've actually just started posting lots of smaller clips from the podcast, but they're getting very, very low numbers, which I'm interested in. And I think if we think about that movement thing that we're talking about with Oasis and the UK, I'm not sure if we'll ever get that, because often, even though we can access a lot of that content for free, whether it's on YouTube, social media, the content in the end is often at the behest of what the algorithms create. So how do we look at that? The practice that I think about is now, and we can delve into how we kind of got at this point later on, but how do we look at those kind of things that exist, but we still think that we need to be online as Christians because that's where everyone else is. We need to be preaching the good news of Jesus, I think, online, but it's how we do that. Now, thankfully, we have the strategy, which is really helpful, But then the next thing is, what does that mean that we are doing in our day-to-day ministry in terms of communications? And that's the thing that it's probably taken me 4 or 5 years to get to the point of actually thinking, we do have a solid practice across how we do that in various different areas. So that's all the things that I've been thinking about. I suppose that the next thing is like, where do we go from here now as Christians? Because we learnt so much during COVID. It was extremely, I think God was very much had his hand on the timing of this, of when I came on staff, was that I started in January 2020 and then COVID hit in March 2020. So we started with podcasts in terms of just taking the audio from the gatherings and that we were streaming and then putting them up. That's really the first thing that I did on top of doing the Shock Absorber podcast. And then at some point during that lockdown, we started the Chip Lunch podcast, which was really just to hear people. Originally, we started as a youth podcast. We're like, I remember saying to Ethan, what if when school comes back, they're like, did you listen to this on, and they're at school talking about what they listen on the podcast. And it kind of evolved from there to be people telling stories about Jesus changing everything. That's what we call it now. So that kind of started, and then 2021, when we had the lockdown, we had to call off Week Away, and we're like, we need to do something different for Week Away. And I remember sitting in these sessions that we had trying to figure out what we were going to do. Brayden was part of that. And we eventually, pushed by Stu, I think, was to why don't we try to do it in a podcast format? Because we had experience doing it in a podcast format, and we did 4 or 5 days in a row of a podcast of some kind, but it was more interactive. We had one of my favourite puppets, Lionel, that we put on
Shout
there.
out, it was his birthday this week.
Oh, was it?
Oh,
Yeah, I
there you
got a
go.
notification on Facebook.
Happy birthday, Lionel.
Happy
Yeah.
birthday
You're
to
out
Lionel.
there.
Yeah.
Where did he retire to? Iceland or something?
Yeah, and then he
there's a
was
whole-
in space.
It was the whole law around
Yeah.
Lionel.
Yeah. So anyone who's not really part of Sorrow Church have no idea what we were talking about. But that's a really good element to think about. And I'll ask you guys this question about what do you think about creating content online as Christians, and how can we do that? Because a lot of the Christian content that I see is individuals doing
Interesting.
work. And I think some of it is really good. And I think a lot of it, everyone who's talking about, for example, Wes Huff at the moment, I think he's genuinely preaching the gospel. And he's part of an apologetics movement that's come out of Canada, which is great. But I think as churches, I think there's a difference between individuals and what they're doing online and what we're doing as a church. So I suppose my question to you guys would be, is there any kind of content that you consume online that's not individual?
As in, it's not just
Christian
one
content.
person?
Yeah, I said Christian content that isn't for your individual benefit.
Oh, sorry, hold on. I think I misunderstand the question. As in, the creators are not doing it individually, or that me as the audience are not consuming it individually?
I think that actually it's a really good way to draw that out, because I think they're almost one and the same to a certain degree, because we are so individualistic online. But as we talk about with our strategy is that, and we talked about this last week, is that we're not made to be alone. I think I quoted you basically saying we're made to be incarnate beings.
Yeah,
that's the title of the podcast. And I think that highlights the thing that we have to grapple with putting content online, is that it has to be individual for people to, let's say, click on it. But that's not the end goal of what we actually want to achieve. We actually want to achieve ability, saying that we are part of God's kingdom, and how do we grow that further?
Right.
So my question, I suppose, is how would we approach that then, if that is the two things that we have to pull apart, where majority of content is very much made for the individual?
Yeah, interesting. The one thing, so the main kind of media group that I consume all of their stuff is Holy Post Media. So this is Phil Vischer, who created VeggieTales, lost that company, started again, was doing a whole lot of things. So he and his partner, Sky Jitani, who I greatly appreciate, they have sort of grown. So for about 10 years, they were just doing a podcast. It was just two of them and a friend and guests, and it sort of evolved over 10 years from, small to large. And one of the trajectories that they've been on is that people who are disenfranchised by their own local church are finding community through listening to this content and connecting. So there's a bit of a Patreon community where people chat. They now host live events where people come along, and there's a sense of belonging and all these kinds of things. And one of the things that they sometimes are wrestling with live, sorry, not live, as in, publicly as they talk on the podcasts, is the people have come around their vision of, and particularly people who are frustrated with, hyper partisan church, and they're trying not to be partisan, but trying to be sort of central, what do they say?
Partisan in terms of politically?
Politically, yeah,
okay.
yeah. So particularly in America, you've got, you can get hyper partisan churches, and people are getting frustrated by that. And so what has happened is you have communities, but they are online communities. So the people are connecting through online. And I've heard them sort of wrestle with some of this idea, because all of them are pro-church, as in like they believe that an incarnate worshipping community is essential for people's faith. And so they sort of play around sometimes with this idea of what does it mean to be influencing people spiritually, but not actually being people's pastor, and not intending to create community around them, but also being a supportive network of people who are, hurt or whatever, or finding their church frustrating and finding community. So it's an interesting example for me as I sort of watch from afar, and I'm in Australia, not America, so no skin off my nose what they do. But people who are finding a sense of community online around a particular thing, but it's not incarnate, it's not weekly, it's not gathering together. And so people are feeling this sense of community, but not actually embodying regular community around. And I'm sure that there are plenty of other examples of people who are fans of particular podcasters or pastors or whatever. People who will say, Matt Chandler is my pastor, or Tim Keller is my pastor, because they're the podcast that I listen to, or they're the whatever. And there's another podcast I listen to where it's called Ask NT Write Anything, and people are asking, and sometimes the questions are quite pastoral. And NT Wright's always really careful to say, I'm not your pastor. Like, some of what you are asking needs to be handled by someone who you are in incarnate relationship with, and you are meeting with regularly, and you are accountable to. But from a theological or whatever, this is where you might start to head, and then we'll start to answer a question, but pushing people back. And so, the idea of creating content where it's going out into the digital world, people can consume it digitally without being engaged in an incarnate community. I think there's an interesting tension there of what role is this media playing? Does it actually, and this is maybe that Marshall McLuhan, the medium is the message kind of thing, like does podcasting sermons, podcasting church services, watching church online actually work against what the church ought to be doing? So does the content we create actually deconstruct a church rather than construct a church? And how should Christians be, creating content and playing in that space?
I might have a couple of answers, maybe, how we try and approach it, but I'd be interested, Brayden, if you've got anything to add to that too, like what kind of Christian content you consume, and
I think
and even off what Tim said.
Yeah, just building off what Tim said, I think because my experience of church is so built into the local experience, it means that I haven't ended up in any of those spaces. Does that make sense? Like even when I approach something like university ministry or any kind of like parachurch organizations. I've just never ended up there because I've been so bought into the local thing. I think I do consume a few Christian things, but it's normally all that kind of like dynamic leader who's a really good preacher, and so I like, you'll see something there and you'll be like, oh, I'm encouraged by that. That's cool, but it's not necessarily a community that I'm looking to dig into and be a part of. Or at least I haven't found myself looking for that. Whereas I know, there's, especially for people like you've mentioned who are maybe disenfranchised with the local church experience, you could see how seeking those things out and finding it in particular spaces would be something that they would do.
So Joel, I mean, one of our frameworks that we think through practice in across all of our service teams is this long-term, low-key and relational. That's the way that we want to do our practice. So how does that play into, let's stick with podcasting. We can talk about other things as well, but how does long-term, low-key, relational play into the way that we think about the creation and the publication and the promotion of podcasting?
Yeah, I think the first thing is that it's not about audience capture. I think that's the thing that's really important, because I think that's kind of playing off what Brayden's saying. Which
seems to be working with the numbers that we're getting. Is that what you're saying? Like
it's because once you're hosting it, it'll
right, it's all going to change now.
That's right. It's on your Substack. So we subscribe to Tim's Substack, by the way. He writes very good stuff.
The Child in God's Church.
Yep.
timbealhearts.substack.com.
There it is. Well done. Good plug. I think there's a little bit of a balance. It's kind of similar even when we talked about arts, was how do we do it well, but not in the pursuit of being extremely professional or having a really large audience. And I think, and I'm going to sound like a broken record all the time, that's the reason we have this well thought out, really something that we've grappled with is the strategy, is that we can't do what I said we did during COVID times, which I'm really proud of a lot of the stuff that we did together as a team, without having that strategy that we're all inculcated with for a very long time, and therefore we could do it. It was a pretty easy transition, I think. I mean, Brayden, you were a big part of it. It wasn't easy, but it wasn't like we were spending time figuring out all the things that we were going to do and weren't going to do. We knew what they were. It's just, how do we do that online?
Yeah.
So,
and necessity meant we had to do it online.
Right. So it forced us, but then it was like, well, the forcing is easier into what we're changing that practice, because their strategy is really strong and our practice can be really flexible. The thing that I've always struggled with and have for the last 5 years while being on staff, working 1 day a week, is really understanding what our practice is. Like low-key, long-term, relational, that makes sense to me. But what does that look like when it goes online is what your question was. And only last year we really figured out what that would kind of look like, or at least have a framework to kind of think through how we do it. Because we kind of started a bit round the wrong way, is that we started podcasts and stuff. And now as we've come out of COVID, we're now trying to figure out how do we grow this ministry to become, because we said this last week, it's a fledgling ministry. It's really new, especially for churches, I think. So I think you have to be careful of being too critical of what other people are doing online, because they're just having a crack as well. But I think that the strategy is what makes it actually a lot easier to know what direction you're heading in. But then the other thing that we say under practice is we're on discipleship and mission together.
Yep.
And so a long time I was thinking about, maybe it's like internal, external communications. Is that how we do it? But then it was really clunky, because it would be like, do I just have teams that work on internal, or do I just have people that work on external, or how does that work? And thankfully we sat down just one day here at the cottage at MCC, where we meet together as a staff team, and talked to Joey, who's been on this podcast, about, what do you like watching on YouTube? Really, that was the question. And he said he liked chef videos and chess videos, two that start with CH, which is funny. But the thing was that we worked out, they're authentic, they're insightful, they're entertaining. So that's almost the element of where you like to consume it. That's what I'd like. But as we figured out that's what we can also say is what our discipleship element is of our practice. So the perfect example, I think, for that is the Chip Lunch podcast, which we've talked about before. and we just recorded a great one today, but we're up to episode 183, I think. But eventually, when that comes out, we recorded episode 183 today, this morning with Brayden. That is people genuinely telling us how God has worked through their lives.
Yeah.
And it's easy for them because it's the thing that they're an expert in, which is their life. But to have 180 plus episodes about different people telling us how God's worked through their life is actually a form of discipleship, I think, because you can hear people go through the same things and see how they respond to that and how they ask God to work through their lives, and seeing, that happened to me as well. They're almost building a relationship before they get there. And I think that's where we also talked about last week, is if you go too far digital, like the Phil Vischer podcast that you're talking about, and not enough incarnate realities together, I think that's a bit out of balance. I think the idea is you even talked about 80-20, of you can have some things that are supplemental, I think, to your discipleship.
Yep.
But I don't think it should be your primary form of discipleship, only because I don't think that's how God's made us to interact with one another. Then the mission element is that we can unpack this a bit more, because I'd like to give you guys a chance to talk. But is the mission part of it is a continuum now. We see it as our external communication is a continuum. So whether people are looking for a church or are checking out Christianity, where do they drop into a continuum? Because we want to get them towards being a regular at church. And we can look at that as in terms of a digital way of, like, they go to the website and then they check out our stream, for example, and then they maybe check out our social media and our podcasts, and then, like, really what we want them to get to in terms of communications is receiving the newsletter, because that means they're a regular at our church. But that has only really been something that we've worked out in the last, I think it was in November last year.
Okay.
That's when we figured out.
So, Brayden, I've heard a number of people sort of quip that, your website and perhaps your streaming and maybe even your social media is kind of, it's the equivalent now of your church's front door. That this is people's first experience of your church. And if people are thinking of coming to church or changing churches, they're more likely, they will spend a lot of time consuming your church on your digital presence before they turn up. Yeah. How do you, as a church pastor, like, how do you think about that? Is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Is it a neutral thing? And then how do we respond to that as a church?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting thing, but it's something that's consistent with people's experiences all across things that they do now. Like, if you're going to go and eat somewhere now, you'll probably look up the menu before you go.
If they don't have a website,
you'll look up that, and it's just a different.
And then when they don't have a menu, it's really frustrating.
Yeah, exactly. It's just another step that exists within lots of aspects of our life, and I think it is actually it's quite exciting in a way that lots of people can get a little glimpse of what we're putting online before they can come along, and hopefully maybe that will alleviate some anxiety or help them get a clearer picture of something. And there's really cool positives of that, and that is why the website is a very intentional part of our digital ministry. If you chat to someone like Grace from Ride, she ended up coming along to Soul Revival when she was looking up a few churches because she saw there was a number of VPs on the website. She's like, oh, that's interesting.
Volunteer pastor.
Yeah, volunteer pastor, sorry. That's interesting. That's not something I've seen before. I'd like to go and check out what this church is on about. And so, like, it's a really positive tool to be used. But like Joel said, like, it's supplementary. It's helping people access, hopefully, the Christian community that we're trying to express, the Jesus-shaped community that we're trying to express. And hopefully it can be supplementary and add to people being excited about that, experiencing that, being interested or curious in that, and pointing people towards Jesus, which is what I think is really cool. One of the cool things I'm excited about being on this podcast is we put all our ministries in pairs. Arts and comms are a ministry pair. So
Yes.
we're very similar in what we're trying to do. And I remember in the podcast where I was talking about tech, the Proclaim and the sound ministries we have, there's something really cool about a ministry. Like those ministries are purposely set up to help point people towards something else. And I feel like that's what Joel has come to in his comms ministry is he's making content that is awesome, that's engaging, that's entertaining, that's genuine. But it's also hopefully continually pointing people to not only Jesus, but the community that we're trying to create here in Soul Revival, shaped by Jesus. And it's pointing people towards those two things while also being content in itself that is genuine and engaging.
Yeah. And I think that's right. I know that from very early we were saying we want the vision of the website to not be for our members.
Yeah.
Like there's actually there's frustratingly little on our website for those who are regular members.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's funny because every year around Easter and Christmas time, people, our own people, go to the website and expect to find the details of when are our Easter or Christmas services, and they're often frustrated, like, when is stuff coming? And we go, well, just read the newsletter. That's how we communicate internally.
Yeah.
But I've had a number of people who have spoken to me and said, oh, I love your church's website. It's written for the outsider. And I'm like, oh, good. You actually got it. that was the point. The point was to sort of invite people into the church and into community.
Yeah.
And this is my reflection of the three different podcast streams that we have, Joel. And I wonder what you think about this, that this program, the shock absorber program, as you said, the design has been, let's get some of Stu's ideas out into the world. And that's, obviously we can do it without Stu, but it's been, how do we communicate the theology, strategy and practice of Soul Revival? But I guess in one sense, the audience I see for this channel, I don't know what you call it, the program, is almost feed, is almost 50-50 in that it's great when our own people listen to the shock absorber because they're understanding more about our church. But actually we also want an audience for this podcast that is not at our church, not intending to come to our church, but wanting to think about, what can I learn from Soul Revival to put into my own practice? Yep. So there's, in terms of that long-term, low-key relational and advertising the Incarnate community, I feel that there's less of that in this stream, intentionally so, because it's partly an educational, partly helping shape people's culture outside of our church. And again, I know that there are a number of people who have fed back to me that's what they find helpful about these discussions is because they're capturing ideas and going, okay, how might that work in my context? Which has been the whole point of these theology, strategy, practice mini-series on each of the service teams. Chip Lunch, I feel, is a bit different. I feel that Chip Lunch draws us into our community.
I agree.
Yeah.
And pulls us into a closer low-key relational. And again, I know churches who might do a 5-minute spot and get some of their members up and give them a bit of an interview. How did you become a Christian? What are you finding encouraging? How do you live as a Christian now? And when people talk to me about the Chip Lunch, that I'm saying, it's that, but for 3 hours. It's like, or 2 hours, like it's 2 hours of someone's life.
Yeah.
But what that does is it draws us into community. I would find it strange, curious, if there are a lot of people outside of our church who didn't know the people on the Chip Lunch, but were listening to the Chip Lunch regularly from the other side of the globe. That would be curious to me because I'm like, it's lovely, but why are you interested in 2.5 hours of this person's life who you don't know, will never meet, have no intention of being in a relationship with? But Chip Lunch, I think, should go out to all of our members should be listening because we're learning more about each other. So there are those kind of different focuses. And then finally there's the podcast, so the sermon podcast stream where we release that. And I think that might be some of that 80-20 stuff of, there might be times when I miss a gathering. I might be on kids. I might be serving in hospitality. I might be away and not able to, and I can catch up on the sermon, which is, like we talked about last time, it's a poor substitute. But as a filler, as the 20%, not the 80%, I can kind of fill in
It's
on
better,
that.
better than none.
It's better than nothing.
Yeah.
But I think it would also, we'd want people to miss, like to hear the sermon and go, oh, I really miss sitting beside and amongst people hearing this. Like, I don't know how we communicate that. But so yeah, as I was thinking about the 3 different channels, streams, programs or whatever that you could log into, all of which come through on our YouTube feed in the same stream.
Yep. They're on our YouTube channel, yep.
Yes. So if you just subscribe to our YouTube channel, you'll get all 3 of those, plus all the extras. So like and subscribe. How's the hosting going? Is that good?
Doing
a good job.
Doing it more than me.
I don't know, does that, my take on all of that, does that resonate with what you perceive your ministry to be?
I think you absolutely nailed it. So, the Shock Absorber is more externally focused. It doesn't mean that people can't listen to it from our church. We've had a number of people contact us in regards to our ideas and thoughts about how to do ministry. The kind of tagline that we have for Shock Absorber is doing church a little bit differently, which we have used in our website before as well. And I think the chip lunch is more inward focused, like you're saying, and it is to build relationships amongst all of the people at all of our gatherings. We're now at 7 gatherings at 5 different locations, so it's a really great way to be able to do that. The sermon podcast is the one that we started, it'd be second, but that was the one that I really cut my teeth on trying to figure out how to audio edit and stuff like that, which I had done for the Shock Absorber initially, but that was all. The first Shock Absorber was recorded on GarageBand with microphones that we borrowed from the arts team on a Thursday afternoon when I was able to get some time off work, for example. The funny thing, and I think this is all going to encapsulate what we're kind of talking about, is that so my title is digital pastor, and a lot of people said to me, oh, you work in IT, don't you? I'm like, no, I don't work in IT. And so I've always seen, I think, technology as a tool. I think I pick it up pretty quickly. I've been having conversations in my other work recently about how older people just struggle a lot of the time. But there's also this thing of like, if you just get a young person to do it, they'll know how to do it. And I find that that's not the case. They know how to operate. Like I work at a building company and they know how to operate the Sportsbet app, but they sometimes don't know how to solve problems with it. So I've always, interesting that it's always revealed to me that I think technology is a tool that can enhance things, but not at the detriment, as we're saying, to what our incarnate relationship should be with each other, but also with God. And I think it's supplemental. And I think it's funny, just even doing this podcast now has made me realize that that's how I've always seen it. But other people have interpreted in the way that we're, like the opposite way we're talking about it, is it replaces what we think we should be doing. But I've always I love going to church. And if I miss it for a week because I've gone away or something, even when we went a week away, I'm like, oh, I haven't had church. Like we did, but I haven't had normal, regular church. And so I think it's a lot of it like personally motivated is I want other people to be able to experience that. So how can we use the tools and technology at our disposal to enhance their experience of church, but it's not the first thing. Because if that was the case, then we would make it super professional and invest heaps of money in our stream. If you watched our stream, it's not great at the moment, like in terms of video quality and stuff. Yeah. But it is getting the key thing across, which is the Bible is being read and the sermon is being preached by often you guys faithfully and truthfully, because that's where we want people to be, is experiencing God and what he can do with our lives through that. And that the one way someone might be able to access that is via the internet.
Yeah. And I like that, when you're invested in the stream or the sermon podcast because you love the community, the quality is secondary. Yeah, I don't care if the quality's rubbish, because I just happen to be sick at home this week. I don't want to come and share my germs with everyone, but I can poorly contribute to the community by watching the stream on Facebook, and participating in some way in the service. And I like that we've, I don't know if this is a regular thing now, but we've had in the past people within the service who are on the comments in the stream and just sort of interacting, because we've got a couple of people who can't meet with us geographically, who see themselves as part of our church.
Like Ray in Japan.
Nikki in Tassie.
Yep.
And so there are people in the service who do little shout outs and, hey Ray, like good to hear from you, those kinds of things, which is a nice way of kind of knitting into community. I don't know where I was going with that. Just the fact that it's drawing us into community rather than replacing.
Thank you. That's a really good way of thinking of it.
Yeah. So, and I think not that we're not intentionally bad with the stream. Like we didn't intentionally buy poor quality cameras and stuff up the sound and like we still want to communicate it well.
Yep.
But as you say, the driving force, and this comes from the theology and the strategy of our communications, is we want to draw you into community, not replace community. And I think that's been a really helpful way of doing that. We've only got a few minutes left. Change tracks to the newsletter. This is most churches will do some sort of newsletter, news bulletin, announcements in church. So this is, for decades, probably longer, people have had this kind of community. Although I had this random thought last week as we were talking about the strategy, and you said it's a relatively new thing to record and publish podcast sermons. And I thought, actually, like there used to be a whole tape ministry, where people would record the sermon and in cassette tapes and post that around Australia. So
it's like bootlegging,
bootleg sermons. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. And even I don't know how popular it was to publish people's sermons, but I mean we have sermons from,
we found a bunch of the tapes.
Yeah, but I was just thinking from history as well. Like we've got, Charles Wesley's sermons, and we've got, anyway. That was my only thought about still in that trajectory of recording and passing on sermoning. Sorry, back to newsletters. Just tell us, how do we do newsletters? What is the format, and how is that trying to achieve our strategy in the practice of publishing a weekly newsletter?
Do you want to go first? Is there anything you want to contribute first, Brayden? Or what do you like about the newsletter?
What do I like about it? I don't consume the newsletter very often because I'm often in the meeting where we're talking about what's going into the newsletter.
Yeah, that's funny.
So, yeah.
That is true. I feel the same. I look at it like, wow, this is all really familiar. Oh, no, that's right. We wrote it together.
Yeah.
Put it together in the staff meeting.
Well, I open it up because I make sure I haven't done it wrong.
Right, yeah.
I haven't stuffed it. I'm getting better at that. Less mistakes in it. But
I think I'm in awe of the amount of effort that goes into it every week.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, I got to say that Jai helps me a lot with that. But I think
So just to fill in those who may not be part of our church. So it's we're using, so it's a digital newsletter.
It's an email
It's an email newsletter that we're putting together on whatever platform that's not sponsoring this
we
program.
use Squarespace.
Squarespace, okay. And so it goes out via that. And we don't do printed, although MCC does a version of it.
Yeah, they print a couple
form.
off.
That's right.
Yep. They have a demographic that appreciates that, and so we're trying to serve and love them by communicating well. What is the function that it is playing?
I think, again, I'm going to go from the strategy, is I'm thinking about, and as I said, we'll publish a talk that I did at the VCA conference next week, but talking to people there about their newsletter is they find it quite difficult. There are often it was at that conference, there's a lot of admin staff where people would call them up late and say, oh, can you put this in the newsletter? And I think something that we often try and grapple with is what should be in the newsletter. Because first of all is that, the old way was obviously printing a pamphlet or whatever and handing it out as you left or entered the church. This is what it highlights, is the beauty of technology is that it's far more cost effective and easier to make something look nicer by being able to do it digitally.
Yes.
And that I can send it to however many people are on a mailing list. Very easy to do that.
Yeah.
But really, what is it like you said, Brayden, similar to arts, or if you said, Tim, is it drawing people into community and leading people, or are we just putting our individual desires in here for someone to come to the thing that we want? So with our strategy is that and you even touched on it when you're talking about people not seeing our events, as we like to call it on the website, is because we are intentionally, through our strategy, not trying to promote events.
Yes.
It's important to do low-key, long-term relational, meaning we do church every week. We are here every week, and this is what we are doing, and we would love you to be part of it every single week, which is what I love about it. And that like I said, I miss church, and I'm like, I feel bad that I haven't been at church. And I think it's a struggle sometimes to see what we put in there to highlight a ministry that's really great to be doing something, but is it saying you should know more about my ministry and you should know what we're doing? Or is it saying, hey, this is really cool and really encouraging? So that's the first thing. Stu recently has started putting some articles about what he's doing about his PhD, and I think that's fantastic because I think it's communicating our culture. So really, I often see the newsletter as a way of communicating the culture of what we would like to see at church. And in even just talking about it now, I see the way that we are kind of providing these touch points is, I think the benefit of what digital ministry, any kind, provides is multiple touch points within someone's day/week in order to draw them into the community. I think back then, and kind of relating to what we're talking about, the Oasis, there was one medium. Now, because the internet splintered it we have numerous ways of doing it. So that's why our practice looks quite spread out, but it's unified under the strategies because we've got podcasts, we've got a newsletter, all these different ways. It's kind of like an advertising way of going, if I want someone to know about my product or movie, I need someone to see it in 3 different locations and 3 different mediums in order for them to pay attention to it. Now, as you've highlighted before, Tim, we don't like to use too many business axioms in our the way that we speak because it's not fully reflective of what God's kingdom should be, we think. But I think that is the way we kind of see it now, is the newsletter is just one, again, part of the arsenal, part of the toolkit that we have to be able to draw people into that community. So the newsletter, again, is a battle of, would we like people to go to this thing, but is that aligned with our strategy or not? I think that's the hardest thing we have with our newsletter, and you tell me if you disagree, but I think that's the hardest thing, is like, should we be putting this in news? Are we just doing this because we want people to know about it, or do we want to draw people into community and to do it? But people need to know about things.
Yes.
So that's the opposite thing. But I do like it that the newsletter, we say that is our one main form of communication. And we say, if you want to know if something's on, it's the newsletter.
Yep.
And talking to people at that VCA conference a month or so ago was that they struggle because some of their congregation would rely on announcements at church. So they were like, didn't know that it would need to go into the newsletter, or didn't know they should put it in the newsletter.
Yeah.
So I think that's the battle, but I wonder if, again, what's your strategy? Because that's what again highlights what you can do in your practice.
Yes. And I think I was just reflecting something you pointed out there that I don't think I'd quite become conscious of yet, was we are intentionally drawing people into our church. And so a key part of our strategy is church is the main thing.
Yep.
And everything else is an optional second. And I quite like that. And I'm reflecting now on the way that our website is come to church. It's not come to this course, this event, this thing, all of these extracurriculars, which is reflecting the idea, and Stu says this often, that we believe that both mission and discipleship happens in the gathered congregation on a weekend gathering. So those 7 gatherings across 5 locations, that is where we're doing mission, and that is where we are doing discipleship, and that's what we want to draw people into. And so that's what we communicate on the website. The website doesn't tell us about Men's Feed. It doesn't tell us about Craft Group. It doesn't tell us about all of these other things. It tells us about the gatherings. That's what our key thing is. And then if you want to, there's all of these other little bits and pieces that we do along the way.
Supplemental again.
They're a supplemental, that's right. But the key thing is the key thing. I really like that. And sometimes, I just try and play around with that when I'm service leading, and it does come to that time where we highlight one or two of the announcements, but not everything. And sometimes I'll kind of say, here's what you're missing out on if you don't read the newsletter, and then just rattle off 6 things and then not give them any more information about that. And part of it is just trying to get, if you want to be communicated to, that's where it's at. But I particularly want to highlight, this one thing or whatever it might be. So I think that's really helpful. Coming up to the end, Brayden, any other thoughts on communications and how, and again, I liked your idea, your thought earlier that how arts and communication feed into each other.
Definitely, because I hadn't thought of that before either.
It's
really good.
And particularly when you get to that back-end technology side that is helping both our gatherings run well, but also enable the content to be then proliferated out as well. Final thoughts on communications.
I think it's been a great discussion, really thinking through, the way that it's facilitating our community that we have shaped in Jesus. I've been sitting here thinking about, we started off talking about music, and it's kind of like you have recorded music that you can go back to and listen to whenever you want, really.
Yep.
But why do people buy concert tickets?
That's right.
Why spend another $80? And it's because it's fundamentally a different thing. And I think that's what we're talking about here with, say, a recorded sermon and then expressing a Jesus-shaped community together. They both do wonderful things and encourage, but one of them is fundamentally what we are called to do as Christians, and that is gather. Yep. And one of them is hopefully helping people grow in their love and knowledge of Jesus, but also feeding into the other one. I think that's been a really, I've enjoyed thinking about this for the last hour.
And I love it, and I think that fits with our continuum. Is that just to finish it? That continuum idea came up from a story of a couple of people that joined our church a few years ago, Jamie and Chloe, and that the funny thing is that Jamie was living across the road at South Village from the factory they have at Soul Revival Kirrawee. And they're like, I think that's a church over there. I think it was on a Friday night where they heard it was being really noisy and the kids were having a great time. And then the first thing they did was, there's a sign there. It says Soul Revival Church. Looked up the website. And then they looked at the social media. And then they checked out one of our sermons on the stream, I think, because teaching was important to them. And then they found out that there was a gathering at Cronulla, and they went to the gathering at Cronulla. And I think I use that story a lot because that, in my mind, is the aspirational idea of communications ministry. Is they had left their church, they were looking for a new church, and that's the kind of pathway they went on, and that's how I'd like to see doesn't mean we always get it right, but that's how I'd like to see our content come on. And people can drop into that continuum at other times.
Yep. But
that's how, whether they're Christian or non-Christian, that's how I would like people, it's drawing them into that gathering. And I see communications just as similar to arts, it's just a way of leading people to that more than anything else. Because again, we're just partnering with God to be able to do that. He's speaking to them through whatever we're putting out online. Yep. We're just, again, facilitating that, like Brayden said.
Yep. Well, I'm going to turn preacher mode for a second. Good move to the moment of application. So if you have gotten to this part, well done. If you get into this part of the podcast or YouTube video, can I give you an application? Firstly, you might be out there and you might be a member of Soul Revival Church. And if you are, please incarnately come and give Joel or Brayden a massive hug and say nice. An appropriate A-frame side hug and say that you really appreciate the shock absorber and what they are doing in terms of their ministry. If you are listening to this and you are embedded in your own other local church and you're trying to find ideas of how you can help use some of the Soul Revival theology, strategy, practice to enhance your own ministry, can you leave a comment underneath the YouTube video, or shoot a text? I'm sure that there is an email on the website or something that you can communicate, but please reach out and let us know that you're doing that. And if you have stumbled across this for some reason and you're not connected to a local church and you are in the Sutherland Shire or Ryde area of Sydney, reach out, come along and come and check us out. Wherever you are, there's an application in there for you.
That was unreal. It's better than what I do.
Oh, that's right. I was just thinking, the application point, getting to preacher mode.
That's excellent.
But yeah, we'd love to actually hear that you have listened to this, heard this, and you're engaging it, and how you're engaging and how we might be able to help serve you, particularly on the shock absorber, which is, you know, more outward facing. If there are questions that you have, ways that we can serve you, please continue to reach out for that. But we will finish, as we always do, with a one way.
One way.
Awesome.